so much, Steve. Hello, everyone. Yeah, as Steve said, my name is Bernie. Like Hannah yesterday, I am a product manager at LabKey, in this case for LabKey Biologics, as well as being an account manager. And just like Hannah, I spent about 8 years doing research in a variety of fields before coming to LabKey, and I hope today to share some of what I can distill out of that time and my 6 years at LabKey with you, in regard to thinking about collaboration efficiency and data management. Oh, and I tried to build in a little, some obvious breaks into my presentation. So if you ever have any questions, please just post them, and we'll take some time to talk through them. All right, so we all know research can be rather difficult and complicated. Biologics research and development is certainly no exception to that, as it requires a great deal of very broad knowledge and great depth in many specializations. This tends to result organizationally, anyway, in having many teams with highly specialized practices that work on various parts of the R&D pipeline. And as the complexity and number of teams grow, often the cycle time and the associated costs grow with them, and the associated risks. So to reduce that time and cost, obviously new techniques and technologies are necessary, and we learn every year about amazing advances, but also a way to smooth out the interaction between those teams. Collaboration is really critical to success, but can be difficult in practice. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about and learn about why that is. And obviously there are many answers. I think a big part of it is in the way that we generate, manage, and transmit data, which of course is I'd say, fundamental currency of scientific decision making. What a scientist or a team of scientists should apply their minds to next, of course, depends entirely on the available theories and the data that they have on hand, as well as the context and knowledge that's conveyed with that data. And a hindrance arises from the siloing of teams, tools, and data transmission needs. Each specialization in the pipeline tends to generate unique data and often works in separate spaces. Their needs lead to idiosyncratic or post hoc even data management methods, and the use of very different tools than other teams that they might need to collaborate with. And this can lead to questions about data availability and state, and often render the handoffs between those teams at best a secondary consideration. While this may be rather natural, given the way that companies grow, the interdependence of those teams rather demands improved collaboration solutions. So my time at LabKey, I've spent nearly every single day talking to various research organizations, sometimes in biopharma R&D, sometimes in clinical research, or kind of all across the board. And there's been a lot to take in. And while this list is admittedly not exhaustive, I wanna share 3 considerations when it comes to collaboration efficiency. So I'm gonna talk about data standards, data provenance, and data centralization. So first, with a nod to the wise minds at XKCD, I'm gonna let you read this because they know where the pursuit of standards leads. So in the United States, we have the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and obviously equivalent organizations exist elsewhere, but they lay out very specifically, that standards provide requirements and specifications and guidelines or characteristics that can be used to consistently ensure that materials, products, processes, and services, or in our case, data, are fit for their purpose. They allow technology to work seamlessly and establish trust so that markets can operate smoothly, provide ways to measure and evaluate performance, enable interoperability, and protect by ensuring reliability. All of those things sound really good and totally applicable to our industry, to biologics R&D. But how exactly does that play out? So here, some of you might recognize is a picture of the first Ford assembly line, which reduced the time it took to build a car from about 12 hours to just over an hour and a half. Now, of course, now I can't even get basic repairs done that fast, but that's beside the point. The point is that getting a chain of teams aligned on a set of standards, data standards in our case, can have an enormous impact on collaborative efficiency. In this case, I'm not talking about quality standards, as in, like, does this assay run past QC muster? I'm talking about the useful state of the data for you and everyone else. Its format, shape, and completeness, for instance. In what form does your data need to be for it to reach that final and useful status to be submitted to the record? Can you agree with everyone else who needs to make use of it? For example, when you're handed a sample with some, that's partially characterized, what do you actually need to know in order to do your job? And is it interpretable in the form that the data is in? Or alternatively, you need to perform some complex statistics or analytics. Is it in the form that is useful? Is it consistent enough across experiments to be useful in aggregate for some kind of process optimization? Or even more extreme, for perhaps the data scientist who's totally disconnected from the bench work itself and lacks a lot of the context potentially, can they do the modeling, machine learning, forecasting that they need to do? All of these scenarios rather necessitate some kind of agreed upon standard so that each person isn't doing extra work all the time, so that we can reduce the cycle time of biologics R&D. So there's a small degree of chaos that's introduced from a lack of clear standards, obviously. Without that clear canon, you're almost guaranteed to have people repeating work and duplicating effort, unfortunately. There may also be a lot more debate than necessary over data quality when extra interpretation or munging of data is necessary. And then, of course, it's hard to plan or prepare without clear expectations to get the next thing connected in. So standards helps enforce alignment. The extra work from finding, interpreting, and munging data costs scientists precious time, of course. In my observations, it's at least 5 to 10% of their time. And I have the good fortune of having married a statistician and data scientist, and both in her education and in her time working as such, she says that for her, it's actually more like 80% of the time, about 80% or more of the time is spent cleaning and organizing data so that it's actually useful to her. So I may actually be dramatically understating the time cost without reasonable data standards here. There's also a lot less risk of error with standards enforcement, both for us and those Model T engineers. And perhaps most importantly, if you believe like we do at LabKey that your greatest asset is your people, thank you, Adam, you are gonna end up with scientists who enjoy their work a whole lot more if the drudgery is removed from what is a necessarily meticulous and repetitive process. So it's nice to be able to plan around the shape of your data and connect other tools to it. But of course, you can do these sorts of things in a spreadsheet. Actually, I mean, lock a template, set your macros, give people something that they have to fill in, and that is understandably a first place that a lot of organizations go, a lot of scientists go, and there are a variety of pitfalls with file-based approaches. That's a topic for another discussion. At LabKey, as well as many other organizations that specialize in data management tools, we really take the importance of standards to heart, and help you define and update data structures, and help enforce the alignment between teams to smooth out that R&D assembly line, if you will. Yeah. Okay, let me pause briefly here, take a quick drink, and while it's still early, if there are any questions, Steve, please let me know.
Yeah, there is a question. Will LabKey server ever support math operations between columns? For example, provide an easy way for the user to do column A plus column B divided by 5 through the graphical user interface rather than writing SQL in the background.
I will say that we do not have immediate plans to do so. That's a pretty reasonable ask. I think with each of our products, we're very much pursuing that scientist end user utility, trying to maximize that. I think it would not at all be crazy to be in a state where more functionality like that described would be available. Yeah, I'm super happy to talk later about what sorts of things like that would be of use. Specific scenarios that always help us plan. So let's chat later. Okay, thank you. Next up, I want to do data provenance. All right, so next part of this collaboration problem, data provenance. This is your data's family tree. This is what allows you to answer a question like how did the sample come to be in its current state? How is one piece of data that I'm seeing connected to upstream data? Whom do I contact about what I'm seeing regarding this data? And then conversely, how do I share my results so the next person doesn't have to do the same sleuthing that I just described? Obviously, tracking down these answers can be quite a lot of work if you have to go searching for all the right data files in their respective locations, or jumping across different pieces of software to piece it all together, or to ask a half dozen different people. Yeah, that can be fairly costly. As you might have intuited, having that traceability, having that data provenance depends actually on establishing a set of standards that I talked about previously. And in fact, having that provenance in mind, having the ability to answer questions about how data is related, helps you set standards. So nice synergy there. Once you have them, though, those standards, I mean, and have your data meaningfully connected and related, you can save all of that investigation time and alignment time, which is kind of the point. So, connecting your standardized data improves collaboration by providing clarity around critical questions, and again, reducing that data sleuthing and drudgery, so that we can all have and be happier scientists. I have have to share some wonderfully creative strategies that I've seen for minimizing this. You know, we've all seen the very impressive 20, 30, or even 40 tab spreadsheets that help people track their workflows and the data captured. They always have these amazing naming conventions that are used, you know, that indicate like what the molecule is or something about the facility and location of the people involved, you know, what state of the pipeline this information is in. And there's always really fun formatting on the different pages as well. You know, you know, it helps indicate, you know, where you're supposed to put your data and when, and different things get highlighted or change color when it's the next team's turn, and you know which tab on the spreadsheet you're supposed to see, and you have to Control F and kind of search on the various pages for the samples that you care about, and then, you know, if you want to answer these provenance questions, you walk back 10 or 12 spreadsheet tabs, you know, looking for the connections, and of course hope that no one entered a value wrong, because that's crazy. Anyway, it's unbelievably complex, and frankly, some of the spreadsheets are a work of art in more than one way, and they're also a dime a dozen, and that's frankly risky, but at the same time kind of amazing how long people can do it successfully. Another one, I think maybe my favorite one, is this data stand-ups idea. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the way most agile software development is done these days, but the way in general, there's a daily stand-up where we all put our heads together, talk about you know, what we've accomplished the previous day, what we're working on next, so we can stay aligned and work on more than one thing at a time, and ultimately have it all fit together, mesh together to, you know, to construct you know, whatever the features are that we're building. And I've heard stories about people doing data stand-ups at these siloed, you know, biotech or biopharma organizations, where I don't think it was every day. It was at least every week, maybe every couple of days. You know, representatives from each of the interacting groups would compile their data. They'd create narratives to describe you know, what they'd done and why, and which data was the you know, should be used as a source of truth. Show people the files, explain the names, tell them the locations, and just do this every couple of days to make sure that they were all lined up. And it makes perfect sense, but again, a lot of work. You know, and then there's the brute force approach, where you hire a team of people to build your own database application and then maintain it. You know, I've certainly heard of that. You know, software development team and database administrator get together and build exactly what your company needs. And I think that for most small to medium-sized companies, you're lucky actually if more than one person is hired to do that job. And you tend to get a lot of meals bought for you, because you're certainly not using any of your PTO. Anyway, fun examples. Let me move on. Yeah, so the solution components of data provenance. So I still want to make sure that this is clear. Is the ability to you know, define data structures in related to other data, in relationship to other data, you know, with downstream utility in mind, as well as upstream utility. These things aren't, you know, obviously aren't one directional. It's very much cyclical, as well as the ability to define and capture ample metadata around what you've captured that's useful for browsing and understanding those relationships, maintaining lineage between samples, and providing navigation up that chain to answer questions. Let me pause for an actual example, so that so that this is clear. So let's say that you're an analyst who receives a purified protein sample, and you're supposed to determine its immunogenicity. So that means, among other things, you need to know what cell line was used to produce it, so that you can look for remaining cell fragments and understand what you're seeing. And depending on how your organization is set up, there are going to be at least one or two teams between you and the cell line development team that made the original selection. So how do you get your answer? If your data management system maintains relationships between the original components that went into that expression system, that went into producing the protein, your cell line and construct, the related media, et cetera. And each of the protein expression samples that came out of that run, plus its children, and all of the other peripheral data that go in to describe it, if that chain is maintained, then it's actually fairly trivial to learn what the cell line came from, because you can simply walk back up that line, exploring the relevant data as you go. So you want that cell line development scientist at the beginning of that particular scenario to have standards set and data connected. In a little bit, Steve's going to show you a little bit about what this looks like in LabQ Biologics, which uses a centralized architecture for each of the teams along the way to plug into it. And we, of course, maintain that lineage that I mentioned, and the connection to those other bioregistry components. Okay, one more pause again here. Steve, any additional questions come in?
No additional questions, but don't be shy, folks. Please put them in the Q&A there.
Cool. Okay, so next is the value of data centralization. And actually, it's really more like centralization versus federation, which is another big collaboration efficiency topic. Because it's quite understandably, when a new company starts their R&D, they're at such a small scale that almost any data management strategy will suffice, frankly. You can always ask one of the other 3 total people who work in the lab, what data you should be looking at and what it means. So it's obviously a very forgiving environment in that regard. But as you grow, necessity will precipitate some adaptation. There will be challenges there as you grow that arise from a variety of places. Here I have listed things like your data governance needs and user management. The need to navigate between applications quickly, and the need to have information on multiple systems. There's duplication risk, there's security risks, as well as the need to join data from across those systems, which becomes, of course, more complicated the more systems you have and the more distinct they are. And so there's all sorts of potential risks and costs associated with that kind of approach, no matter how natural it might be. So the value of having your data in a unified system is, as you might imagine, a big reduction in these risks and time drains. Obviously, it's a lot easier to find what you're looking for in one unified system, and then where you might otherwise have similar data or related data, but not identical data in multiple systems. In a unified one, you can be confident that what you find is in fact your source of data truth. Whereas if it's again similar but not identical in different systems, which one do you make use of? Are you sure there aren't real differences between what's in there? It raises a specter it can raise a specter about your data. And of course, when the data you want isn't present in a centralized system. There are many fewer possibilities, many fewer explanations for why that is. And you don't have to explore multiple systems to get an answer. Then there's preparing your data for handoff. You know, when I was talking about those data stand-ups, each of those teams spends time compiling and collating the meaningful data, and spends time every single time thinking about what the next person is going to need, and preparing that for an actual handoff of the data. But in a centralized and standardized system, especially one that maintains those connections, you know, provides for provenance, as I described, simply capturing it where it's expected to be is the data bundle. The next person knows where to look. It's nice. Lastly, there's the desire, I guess I should actually say, there's the need to extract value from your data beyond the single experiment. I mean, obviously you have a specific question or set of questions answered by an experiment, but in order to make that data useful beyond a single experiment, it requires both aggregating across experiments, but also joining data from up and down the pipeline to answer broader questions. And it can be a major hurdle to connect disparate systems and disparate data when it's not centralized in some meaningful way, which frankly, as I implied with my wife, who's done a lot of statistics and data science, all that work can end up being manual, which is incredibly time consuming. You know, in that centralized system, especially one that facilitates relating data, those joins of data are likely automatic, actually, and might even be configurable. All right, so the solution component here is pretty obvious. You want a sufficiently comprehensive or flexible system to put all of your data into one place or fewer places. You may recognize the Latin phrase at the bottom of this slide that means out of many one, which also happens to be the motto of the United States, but fits rather nicely into the story I'm weaving here. It can be rather powerful to have your bioregistry sample and assay data capture, your peripheral reference data, and files all in one place. I'm actually going to quote a little bit from Adam's presentation on Tuesday here, because when you're looking at a single system, when you're considering such a solution, there are a number of really important things to think about. You know, he mentioned really strong security and data governance capabilities. No question, if you do not possess those, and you do possess intellectual property and perhaps then these things are critical, perhaps first and foremost in mind. There's also scalability and flexibility. No two research organizations are the same or doing exactly the same thing. And so the ability to grow with you and change with you is pretty critical. Then as I mentioned before, with the different data types, if you can't, you really want to find a system that can integrate those disparate data types and add all kinds of metadata to it. And then lastly, make sure that it's actively developed upon, not something that's sitting stale somewhere, and make sure that you're working with a trusted partner there. Okay. One more pause here for questions while you're looking at the three things that I've asked you to consider. Steve, are there any questions so far?
No additional questions yet.
Okay. I'm confident that they will come and be answered during your presentation, Steve.
All right, great.
I'm not worried about it.
All right.
All right. So it turns out that you can extract a lot of extra value from a system that has all three of these components: standards, provenance, and happens to be centralized, because there are other time-consuming drudgeries that can be mitigated. these collaborative efficiency methods enable things like a much better experience in documenting and sharing results. If you have your data already centralized to your standard, if you have already centralized your standardized related data, you shouldn't have to collate it again to document and present your findings. Obviously, that documentation is absolutely necessary, but that write-up need not add excessively to the scientific effort and time. So if you already have it in the right place, right form, with the right files and images, there's a big value in simply being able to represent complex results in a relevant way to those not interested or capable in the data sleuthing that I've been referring to. Yeah. So now, like, I'm going to be a little bit like Hannah yesterday and put on my product manager hat for a second. And I, of course, am in greater need of a hat. We partnered with, we partnered to build an electronic laboratory notebook on top of LabKey Biologics with a Seattle local biotech called Just Biologics to take the value that LabKey Biologics already provides in regard to these collaboration efficiency methods one step further. And by the way, Will, I assume you're listening, for a comprehensive look at Just Bio's view on this, we will put a link in the chat to a wonderful LabKey user conference presentation that was given this last fall by our friend Tara at Just Bio, because her view on why we did this and how it serves their organization is, I think, really enlightening and fun. But anyway, so a key reason to work through this partnership was to further our mutual goal of accelerating biologics development, among other things, through collaboration efficiency. So we built the ELN directly into LabKey Biologics and gave it access to the underlying structured data that's there. And that data can be referenced for inclusion in the notebook while you're authoring. In fact, while you're co-authoring with other people that were involved in the work, and provides an intuitive way to explain how your data is meaningfully connected. We want you to be able to complete what I sometimes call the scientist cycle. The plan, capture data, and document for yourself while serving your collaborators, which is kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, without having to spend any more time, or at least minimal time, compiling or munging any other data or files. So in a second, since that was kind of a lot, I want to turn the time over to Steve, who's going to demonstrate how all of these different concepts kind of manifest themselves in LabKey Biologics, including how they can be simply tied together through your notebooks. And I hope that his presentation can make this a lot more real, a lot more clear to you. Before I do, though, I just want to emphasize that every time you hear one of us say that we really want to hear from you, in this case, and I'm very interested in your thoughts on some of the efficiencies or hindrances that you've observed at your institution. We're very serious, so we should also put a contact us link in the chat, so it's really easy for people to get in touch with us and have a nice conversation. So thank you so much for listening, and Steve, I'm going to let you take it away and make this more concrete for everyone.